Today, we are continuing our conversation that we had with Claire last week. We are diving into what is the right way to read the Bible, the interpretive methods that we disagree on, and how do we have some resolution or common ground. If you guys missed last week, Claire grew up on the mission field, later deconstructed, so she has a lot of biblical and Christian knowledge that she is passionate about sharing with others. So we thought we'd have her on to discuss our disagreements and where we do agree and ultimately have a lively, fun conversation. So welcome back to the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Ethan.
And my name is Derry. And guys, as always, we're all over the internet. We'd love to talk to you and interact. If you have questions about the show or pushback about episodes, or you have new people you want to have see on the podcast, we'd love to hear. So just DM us on Instagram, comment on YouTube or wherever you're seeing, Spotify too. We check those comments. So we'd love to hear from you. And if you feel like it, we have a Patreon.
Give us money.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. All right, Claire, welcome back. Welcome back. So yeah, last week we, of course, right before the show, we were talking about this, but we talked about, should we take the Bible literally or seriously? What's the difference there, right? Some people might say taking the Bible literally could mean, okay, did the earth or sun actually stand still when they were having the war in the Old Testament, or is that figurative? If you guys don't know that part of the Bible, look it up. It's fine. Or taking it seriously, which probably means like reading it in context and drawing out real messages. I would probably say you can take it seriously and literally with the sun standing still. I would say that actually happened as a historical event, because taking it seriously would also mean reading the type of genre it is. Now, we don't have to go deeply into that one. That was just an example, but anywhere we go from here, continue the conversation is fine with me. Derry, if you have a specific question, or Claire, toss it up for you guys.
I guess the question, like for Claire, would be, how do you interpret the Bible? Like, you're kind of on, we were talking about Lot in the last one, and like how you would reinterpret it in the context. Do you use the same method for all of Scripture, or like what has been your, because it seems like you're still passionate about the Bible, even though you don't believe that it's God's word anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way that I approach the Bible, I would approach it kind of dissecting it into lots of different books. The word Bible, I'm fairly certain, means collection of books anyways. So I think it's really important to approach it as a collection of books, and keeping in mind that every author is going to have a different style of writing, a different point of view. I think often this was probably very implicit in what we were all taught growing up. Did you guys grow up in the church? I'm assuming you did, but I don't want to assume anything.
Different styles, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things that are implicitly taught to us, not necessarily explicitly taught, but implicitly when pastors teach us the Bible, they're teaching us that every author of the Bible kind of shares the same theology. It's all pointing to the same picture. However, I don't think it's realistic to think that all of the authors of the Bible had the same understanding of God, the same theology. So that's kind of one thing I would evaluate. I would evaluate the audience that they're talking to. I would evaluate their context and history. I'm sure you guys probably know this, but for example, pre-Babylonian exile, the authors have a very different point of view than after Babylonian exile. And some of the same stories are being rewritten after the Babylonian exile that have already been written before. And they're kind of giving a different spin on it to reinterpret what God might be doing in their moment in time. And Ethan, I love that you brought up the story of the sun standing still. I actually just saw a post on Instagram about that today. So it was also on my mind today. I feel like that's very random. But things like that, I think that's a great example. I personally don't believe that the sun literally stood still, because that would cause a lot of problems for the entire planet. But as you guys know, there was a lot less understanding of science and astronomy back then. We have so much more knowledge nowadays. But for example, for them, if they saw an eclipse, their instinct would probably be to attribute what's happening to the deities that they believe in. Whereas for us, we could be like, oh, the moon passed in front of the sun, we know what's happening physically in our universe, in our galaxy when that happens. But for them, if they witnessed an eclipse, they would have no idea what to make of it. It would be very strange. So I think a lot of the Bible is them doing the best to interpret their world. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of how I approach the Bible. I approach it oftentimes as a book of mythology, poetry, wisdom. There's a lot to gain from it, but I also approach it with a lot of caution.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That brings up some interesting kind of points. Yeah, with the sun standing still, definitely is more like a presuppositional approach. Like, it to presuppose God exists, or is like, created the universe and then he pressed pause on everything. Which I think, if you agree that God is the supreme being who created everything, it's not a far jump to be like, yeah, he created it, he can pause it and have like individual people still there. Like, I've heard some people argue against it. I'm like, guys, I believe in like once you believe in God, like, if you believe that God created it, it's a lot of the stuff you see in the Bible, like talking donkeys, it's pretty easy to swallow. You're like, that makes sense. Yeah, sure. God can make a donkey talk. He made humans talk. He made both. Probably isn't that hard for him, at least. Hard for us. I have a interesting thought that came to mind when you were finishing up there about like you were interpreting the Bible as a book for the people of the time, trying to make sense of the world. Um, and so we could go down this rabbit trail, unless Derry might want to jump in and have a question more specific here. But I guess I would say, like, it seems like the biblical interpretation you take is like maybe pulling out the belief that like the creator God is interacting specifically with this people. This people is just trying to make sense of their world, similar to how maybe I might approach like Mayan writings that they have about the sun. I'm like, oh yeah, they're just
Mhm.
trying, or the Egyptians are like, oh, the Ra and the God. I'm like, yeah, they're just making sense.
Mhm.
I'm taking out their supernatural worldview, like the pulling the rug out from under them, kind
Mhm.
of like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's not true, that's not real. So I'm understanding this is a myth. Maybe that you're kind of doing the same thing with the Bible and Yahweh and how he interacts. So then the bigger question might be, do you believe that, well, one, God exists? Do you believe God exists? Last week you said you wouldn't call yourself an atheist, so you probably would say, yeah, some type of God exists. But then the question would be like, does he interact with people and how? Because those would be like kind of two questions.
Mhm.
Because if God does exist and he does interact with people, then it's at least plausible that the story of the Old Testament is true, because it's like just telling how God truly interacted. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Hmm. Such a good question. Do I believe that God is real? Yeah, okay, so I have a few thoughts approaching this question. Um, I think I would say that I don't believe in a God that is a type of person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I don't believe that there's a God that interacts with us. Um, but like I said last week, I feel like I'm really open to it because as most human beings, I do appreciate meaning in life and purpose, and I it's hard for me to imagine that after my death there's just nothing. That's really hard for me to wrap my mind
Mm,
around. And
Mm-hmm.
so
mm,
there's a part of me that's like, okay, I'm open to believing that there is some kind of meaning or purpose. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure I believe that there is a personal God.
mm,
However, I was talking about this with a friend recently. Um, I coined a new term, the pleasure of placebo. I'm just
mm,
gonna say that that is kind of how I approach my relationship to God. I realized that there's a lot of positive benefits to believing in God.
mm,
And for me, sometimes I do pray still. I realize that's kind of weird to say that I'm not sure I believe in God, but I still pray. But I think to an extent, I'm like, if there is a God, cool, maybe he's hearing what I'm saying. And if there's not a God, that's okay. I can still appreciate the benefits of externalizing my thoughts and putting them out there in the universe or whatever. I think there's some pleasure to placebo. Um, and then, kind of the other thing I was going to say about approaching the Bible with the perspective of an omnipotent God, I think it's interesting what you're saying, Ethan. And I think most Christians that I've interacted with approach the Bible in a similar way to you. They approach it with the assumption that because they believe God is omnipotent, everything that we're told happens in the Bible is literal. But what I'm kind of saying is, I don't think that the authors of the Bible intended for us to think that. I think I think that they were creating stories for a purpose, and that was how things were written back then. I don't think, for example, the talking donkey, I don't think the person who wrote that story was like, oh my God, there was a talking donkey, I need to write about it. I think what that person was doing was probably like writing a story about this political moment in time. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm forgetting the name of the guy. It starts with a B, doesn't
Balaam.
it? Balaam, thank you. Yes.
Hmm.
He like ends up stopping a war. And I think more what we need to do, what would be maybe personally what I think is a better approach to the Bible, that would make a little bit more sense, would be to be like, okay, I, Claire, in 2026, I know that donkeys don't talk. So I'm going to explore why this author would be writing that this donkey spoke. And Ethan, I think you and I are approaching the story from a different perspective. We're
Hmm.
asking different questions about why that story was written. Um, and I think it's valuable to ask all of the questions about why stories were written. But I wonder why sometimes Christians don't approach it from a perspective of like, maybe the author had a different purpose than making me believe that a donkey actually spoke.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Were you gonna say something, Ethan?
Jump in, go for it. I got some response,
Oh,
but
honest.
I've been
So
talking
much to
for a bit.
say. I'd love to talk about the God part of it. That's what I'm more interested in. But to comment
Mhm.
on what you just said about how do we interpret scripture, um, I agree. Authorial intent is often neglected when Christians are reading the Bible. Like there's within hermeneutics, there's three things to consider. We have to consider the person writing it, so the author. We have to consider the author's world. We have to consider the medium they use. So is it oral? Is it a book? And we have to consider our own
Mm.
context when we're interpreting something. My problem with where modern scholarship goes with authorial intent is that they usually neglect historical context, because if you look at what Jews thought about even Second Temple stuff after the Babylonian exile, um, being literal or not, almost all of the first century Jews thought the stories in the Old Testament, the sun standing still, all that kind of stuff, were literal. And it isn't until like much later Jewish developments that they start taking it allegorically or for philosophical or apocalyptic means. They start reinterpreting stuff. And so while it could be the case that the author originally intended that, the tradition, not from a Christian perspective, but from a Jewish perspective for the Old Testament, points much more towards the original authors thinking those things actually happened. Whether they're right or wrong is kind of irrelevant. But just if we're trying to do good hermeneutics and see what the authorial intent was, if we're getting closer to the actual events, which we can't get super close because we don't have the original documents, but as close as we can get, the majority view among Jews was that those were real events that could be interpreted, of course, to get allegorized truth, but they thought that the actual events themselves did happen from at least from most of the evidence we have. And so I have a hard time reinterpreting Old Testament passages allegorically, or for some philosophical purpose, not because it's not useful, because it is, but because I think I'm doing a bad job hermeneutically in interpreting a passage if I'm putting a thought or a word in the author's mouth that probably wasn't there originally. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think this could probably turn into a he said, she said kind of thing. Um, and I guess I would just have to disagree with you, I think. Like from what I've
Mm.
studied, it doesn't appear that they would have taken those stories literally. But
Mm.
again, that's kind of a he said, she said, and we can't exactly pull out our sources or evidence right now and read them
Sure.
in this podcast. But if we are going to go along with what you're saying, Derry, if we're going to say that they did believe those things literally, I think that the dilemma that we then get into is, okay, if we are saying that God is omnipotent and he's involved in our lives, then the next question is asking, why would he choose to do the things that he does that
Mm.
we read in
Hmm.
scripture? And Um, I was having a chat with my dad kind of recently. My parents are both really strong Christians still. Um, and we were kind of just talking about like in this world, in this system that God has set up, he at least in the evangelical understanding of it, because I do want to acknowledge that there are other Christian denominations who would not agree with this. Um, in this system, God is giving us free will. He's giving us the choice to choose between good and evil. And then, as a consequence of our evil choices, there must be a punishment, and that punishment is hell. Um, and I don't know exactly what version of hell you guys believe in, but most evangelical Christians would say that it's a place of separation of God and separation from God, and there might be some form of physical torture, punishment involved in it as well. Um, but to save us, to prevent us from having to endure that for eternity, God sends Jesus, and that is Jesus is the solution out of that. He is killed, he takes that punishment. And if we discover the truth and believe the right thing, then we are saved forever. But in this system, um, for one, I think it makes me sad that God uses violence to bring about healing. Us, you guys and me, we would never require death to forgive someone. So that's kind of something I have a problem with. And the other thing is, it kind of feels like a rigged game to me because there never really was any option where we wouldn't have needed hell or Jesus's death. And so God supposedly would have set up this system knowing that he would have to kill his son, and also knowing that most of his children would end up in eternal torture. And if we're going to say that God is omnipotent and he can do anything, um, it just doesn't really make sense to me that he would set up a rigged system where we had no choice. There was no world where we would not have deserved hell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're touching on something that tons of people struggle with, even Christians. Like the it's the problem of evil, right? You know that term.
Mm.
And that's the big question. Like, why would God do that? I think I have that question a lot for my Calvinist friends when we get lunch together. I'll be like,
Mm.
so you believe God predestines people for wrath? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, don't you think that's a problem, dude? I'm like, you're telling me that God can predestine people for heaven, and he doesn't. Like, I don't know how.
Mm.
And the Calvinists will say God is completely innocent of any moral wrong in that. And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense in my mind how you can say God is innocent if he's predestining people for wrath. Like, he's the one who's like pulling the trigger on them going to hell. I don't look at it that way, but I think ultimately, like, it's a fair critique to say, well, even if you're more free will, Ethan, like, even if you like the fact that you believe God created knowing people would go to hell is a problem that I have a hard time answering. Even if God gave every possibility, the answers to those, the theological word would be like a theodicy, and there's like a ton of different types of those that have been purported. One I like is like called the best possible worlds one. Derry's more into the philosophy than I am, so he could probably do a better job at this. So feel free to jump in at any time you want, Derry. But I can explain a little bit of the best possible world. And so the idea is like, what does God want? God wants free agents who love him to exist in his world. How do you get free agents? We have to give them choice. Okay, so you can't just have them be robots like they never had a choice to sin. So therefore, is it real love if they never got a choice to leave? So in order to have true love, you have to have a choice. God gave humans a choice. We chose wrong. Then there's punishment. And out of God's love, he's like trying to rescue us from that. And so it's like God in his infinite wisdom looked at all the ways he could get his end goal of people who are free agents who love him, who are his children. And he's like, of all the possible worlds I could make, this one will yield the best results. And so like maybe in every possible every possible, or maybe repetition that he theorized in his head, like he's like, if I create this, would it be like this? If I do that, then he saw this world might have the most amount of people going to heaven, and in order to have people who are free agents who love him, there might have to be people who choose to fall away. That probably still have some problems in it, because it's like, okay, are those people just collateral damage? Like that would be like a fair question maybe in response. But I'll let Derry jump in here as well, because we can parse that out probably for like the next 3 hours, and I do have some more thoughts about that question as far as it pertains to other worldviews as well, like how other religions handle that, how a person who doesn't believe in a god would handle that. I'm not sure anyone truly wins, but I'd like to hear what Derry says first.
Yes, I have so many comments, but also you have a lot of questions there. So I'll try to answer some of them, but I can't answer all of them because I can't talk about hell and justification and cosmology.
Why not?
Together? Yeah, but I'd monologue for too long. But just two of the things that I think that are important that I kind of heard you talk about are like the system that God created seems unfair or unjust, or why does it have to be that way? Like, why did he set it up the way it is? The way he set it up seems to be like strange, because he could have just forgiven us, right? Like, why set up this whole system where you need blood and life and death and violence, right? Yeah. So my opinion is that it has to be that way, and I don't think, if you're starting with forgiveness, I don't think forgiveness without some kind of restitution, sacrifice, penance exists. Like, I don't think there's any offense that's caused in this world that is just instantly forgiven without some kind of cost. We can feel that way for maybe minor offenses, but I think about it this way. If I was to call Ethan like a very mean name or something, or insult him personally in a way that would be insulting to him, like deeply, not just like funny or surface level or something, there's several things that are going to happen. One, there's an offense that I've done to him, which means our relationship is severed in a way. And this is outside of the Bible. This is just like in human interaction, right? Like our relationship gets hurt a little bit. So now the things that are damaged are my character and his trust in me, which then causes us to not have as much intimacy in our relationship. So those are two problems. A third problem is that there's something wrong inside of me that would cause me to say that to him, whether I'm under stress or I have a low opinion of him for some reason, or I'm not good at reading the room, and so I offend him in some way mistakenly. But there's something wrong with me that needs to grow and be fixed so that I don't do that again. And so there's several things that need to happen. And if there's just a forgiveness that says, no, you did nothing wrong, like you're fine, really there's nothing that's solved, because he still doesn't trust me like the way he used to. Our relationship isn't going to be the same as it once was. And there's something in me that might cause offense again in the future. And so the reason Christ has to come and die for us is because I think that system is the only real system that could exist for forgiveness. I mean, now we can talk about, like, does Christ have to die on the cross and all that kind of stuff? And we can get into that in a second. But just for the sake of the direction that I'm going in, the reason there has to be some kind of life given for life is the same reason we do it now. Like, when someone takes someone's life now, we take their life by putting them in jail. Like, we realize that there's consequences for people's actions because we don't want people to reoffend, because we see that there's something inside of them that could cause the taking of someone else's life who is seemingly innocent in the situation. And so a life is taken for a life. And life is the only thing that can truly, in my opinion, cover up something that's dead. And so you need, at least in the Bible's perspective, you need some kind of life to cover that extreme level of something that's taken of a life. Does that make sense? I don't want to be talking too much.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess what I would say is I totally agree with you that whenever forgiveness comes into play, whenever there's an offense, there is going to be some form of sacrifice. There's going to be some form of payment, I guess. But what you described, Derry, I would say, like, the reflection on your character, all those kinds of things, I would say those are vastly different than killing someone. I think killing someone is on a totally different plane than the
I agree.
sacrifices that you have to make to restore a friendship or relationship. And then I guess the other thing I would say when you brought up like the prison system, um, personally, I am not a proponent of our penal system in the US. And I think that restorative justice works a lot better than punitive justice. From what I know, what I understand, I think it makes a lot more sense to help people get better instead of locking them up in jail for ages. And so I think the argument that you're making is kind of maybe coming from a perspective of thinking that that system does work, that is the best version of justice. But I would personally say I don't think it's the best version of justice.
Mm.
Um,
I totally agree with you.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's
I
also
don't
the
think that helps.
biblical.
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you
You
continue.
I was just gonna say I don't think that actually helps people get better.
Yeah. I think that the Bible's view of justice is also retributive. Like the goal of, if you look narratively, though you may not see scripture as univocal and just like from author to author, if you look at the overall narrative of the Old Testament, you see God continually not giving up on his people and trying to, the image is given of like gold being put through a furnace. Like God is trying to refine people, but they're continually not being refined. And so he's continually trying to get people through discipline, which is needed for people to get better, because obviously with the free will they've been given, they've decided to not do good things, which is the same thing that a good prison system would do, right? A good prison system would be retributive. We in a good prison system we could create, there's still confinement though, because the person is shown, let's say they're a murderer, the person is shown that they can't be trusted with the freedom that we give everybody else. So we have to restrict that freedom in some way. So we put them in jail. But if we truly had a good system, we had the money for it or something, I don't know all the solutions, we would have some kind of system that would cause that person to re-enter society and be able to be forgiven and trusted again, given enough time, whatever it is, right? I think that's the same system that the Bible presents. It's not just like you did something bad, there's no hope for you. The point is to be restored, that God would transform the character of somebody on earth. That's what Christ does when we try to emulate his life, which is part of why he died on the cross. Like, we are trying to die to the bad things inside of ourselves, and through Christ's power, we can be restored into the person that we're supposed to be. And that's like the main point of it, is that it is retributive and not just like you sinned, you're never going to be able to be forgiven or changed again. Does that make sense? I also don't like our prison system.
Yeah. I think the idea that hell, the idea of hell existing kind of implies that punitive justice is God's solution to justice. But I'm kind of curious to shift the conversation a tiny bit. I have a question for you guys. Do you believe that there is free will in heaven?
Yeah, we've talked about this a long time ago, because that's like a fun question. Like,
Yeah.
I might, if it's okay, I might try to predict where you might be going with this. Where like,
Yeah,
if
go for
Adam
it,
and
go for
Eve
it.
were like perfect in Eden, and they had free will and left, what would stop someone in heaven from having free will and disobeying God then? Is that kind of some of the underlying thoughts there?
Sorta, yeah, sorta.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
go
yeah.
on. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your answer.
Yeah, so we could get into that. I do want to go one little bit, just one comment back to the idea of like the justice and Jesus and stuff like that. I do think in America there's this like understanding of penal substitutionary atonement, and I'm working on a video in my like very slowly in my head for my own channel about talking about this, because penal substitutionary atonement gets a bad rap because people say it divides the Trinity, where like God is angry at Jesus and punishing him, but we see Jesus in the New Testament saying, no one takes my life, I lay it down. So it's not so much like God killing Jesus as like, I'm so mad at you, Jesus, so you have to do this. It's Jesus seeing the debt that needs to be paid. Like, if you are, get a ticket from speeding and you can't pay it, it'd be like the father seeing the son has a $150 speeding ticket, knows this kid doesn't have a job. He's like, hey, I'll pay this for you. Stop speeding. And so Jesus pays the debt and commands us to live in accordance with the law. And so Jesus willingly did that. It wasn't like I guess it wasn't begrudging, like I gotta go die for these sinners. He was like, I want to do that. So just in case there was some
Also wasn't
confusion
forced
there.
on him.
Yeah, it wasn't forced. Jesus himself says, like, hey, no one, which is a super cool line by Jesus. I love that. He's like, that he's in prison. The Rome thinks they've conquered this like rebellious minority who's starting riots, and they're like, we were conquering him. The Jews are happy because they're like, this guy's giving us a hard time. We're conquering, and he's like, no one's taking my life. I'm laying it down. Like this, if I wanted to, I could stop you, but I'm not gonna. It's like,
What a bar.
I love it. Anyways, back to the question about, will there be free will in heaven? So there's like 3 stages, at least in like the normal Protestant view of salvation that you're probably familiar with, right? There is justification when you're saved. There's sanctification when you are walking or you're living in this life, learning what it means to be a Christian, giving up sin and following Jesus. And
Becoming
then
like Christ.
Yeah, becoming like Christ. And then there's glorification where you enter heaven and you are completely made perfect. So in a way, it's like, yes, there will be free will in heaven, but our wills will have been purified by the Lord's refining work, so that even though we have free will, we won't sin because we'll have been perfectly perfected. And Derek can probably iron out whatever wrinkles are in that as well.
Oh yeah, I got a lot to say, but I'd like to hear what Claire has to say about it first.
I guess when I think of heaven having free will, I made a video about this recently. I don't know if you guys saw it, but I was always taught that that free will was a requirement of love. You can't have love without free will, which I would agree with that statement. I don't think that you can have love if you don't have a choice to love the person. However, we're told that that sin is kind of an inevitable consequence of free will, but then we're also taught that love does exist in heaven. Like heaven is the ultimate place of love. And so I think if God can create a world, if he can create heaven that does include love, and love, like having loving relationships with his creatures is his ultimate goal, why not just start from there? Like why create a world where his children would risk eternal suffering and punishment if he had the option to create a world where love would exist without that risk of hell? I think that kind of, I feel like I have an ethical problem with that. But yeah, I feel like there was something else I was going to say on that note, but it's escaping me at the moment. But yeah, all that to say, I guess the other thing I was going to say is that, like I said, I do think that love requires choice, but if the choice is have a relationship with me or suffer eternally, I don't think that's a real choice. That's an abusive relationship. And yeah, so I kind of have a problem with that. And I think various Christians will kind of answer that in different ways and kind of say like, it had to be this way, or that's what the Bible says, so therefore it is. But yeah, all that to say, I guess I just don't really see that as a real choice. If I'm being presented with be tortured forever or have a relationship with me.
Yes.
That's kind of what I would say to that.
Which would you want me to talk about first? Like the more of the justice one of God, of like what you just talked about, or the other one? I'm not forgetting.
I guess I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts too, Derry, on whether you think there will be free will in heaven.
Yes. Okay.
And why God would not have just chosen to start from there.
Yeah, this is my favorite question. I think this is something I've thought about a lot in my life, and something that's brought a lot of richness to my belief in God. So I had this question myself, like, why wouldn't God just create us in heaven? Maybe like 8 years ago. And I was just trying to figure out, like, what is the significance of this life on earth? Like, what is different about this plane of existence that we're on that's going to be different from the new heavens and new earth? Like, what's the point of it? Because God's not dumb, obviously. Like, why would he have created a world like this if he could have just created us past all of this? And so because he hasn't done that, in like obviously my theistic worldview, that means there must be some sort of reason for the world that we live in right now. And so in trying to find that reason, I was thinking through like the Genesis account, and you see people are made like good. They're not perfect, but they're innocent completely. I think that's necessary because it would be evil of God to create people not innocently. Does that make sense? Like I would think that would be ethically wrong to create people that weren't innocent. Like if I create someone that's guilty, that seems strange because they didn't use their free will to become guilty. And so there's a necessity of God creating the first people that exist, whether that's Adam and Eve or some other people in Adam and Eve's narrative, like creating the first people that exist innocently. But there seems to be a necessity to people having understanding of good and evil and going through the life that we live today. God can't create us, in my opinion, with that knowledge, because when the Bible says in Genesis that Adam and Eve, when the snake says you will know good and evil, the word know there is the same word that they use for sex, like that Adam knew Eve, right? So it's not like they have an understanding or they philosophically know that it exists and they didn't know before, but it's that they know it experientially, like they're a part of it. So I think Adam and Eve had an awareness of sin before. They had the idea that they had free will, but they weren't intimately acquainted with it. And so when they like have this first sin, it's the mark of humanity all of a sudden being corrupted. And it's not that God has done that, but he knew that it would happen. From the beginning. He couldn't have created us in heaven, in my opinion, because he can't create us like not innocently. We would have to choose that on our own. Because he knew that we would choose that, he created a system where we could be fully redeemed and eventually make it to a place where with the free will that we have, we would choose to live with good instead of live with evil, which is, I think, is what most human beings are trying to do. I mean, some people like evil more than like good, but most human beings are trying to be good people generally, right? Like, I think it's pretty innate in human beings to think like, oh, like everybody kind of wants me to be good, so I think I should probably be good. Like that's the point of Christianity, is that we were once innocent, and based off of our own free choices, we became not innocent, and we're trying to get back to a place of being innocent again. But there's a necessity for that free will to be there so that we can choose on our own to not be innocent anymore, because God can't make us that way in the first place. So the reason that there's not sin in heaven is because we have the knowledge of good and evil, and with our own free will, we've decided to to become like Christ. We've allowed God to make us like Christ. So now there is free will in heaven, just as Christ has free will and he exists in heaven, but we won't choose to sin anymore because we're made perfectly like Christ. And God couldn't have made us there in the end, because he would be making us like with the ability to know good and evil experientially, which I think would be forcing evil on somebody.
So, Derry, are you saying that you believe that we have the capacity to live a perfect life if we so choose?
Not here on earth, but we have, like, the point of Christianity is to live a better and better life, not through your own power, but through the power of the Spirit, which is like the whole point of the New Testament for the most part. So like, maybe if someone was given 1,000 years to live or something, they could be so sanctified like the Lord and become so much like Christ that they no longer sin. Protestants and Catholics differ on how that happens, right? Protestants would say there's like most Protestants would say that there's like a moment after you die where like God snaps his fingers and you become perfect all of a sudden. Catholics would say that there's a purgatory. And as I kind of side more on the purgatory side of things, though I don't know if you're aware or not aware, because growth is painful. Like when you're a kid, you realize like when your limbs are growing quickly, you're like, oh, there's like growing pains. And like we're all familiar with that. To like grow and go through something in this life is often painful as well. Like, or at least it's uncomfortable. And so the Catholic idea or Orthodox idea of purgatory is like you continue the life that you're living now of being refined, denying yourself and becoming more like Christ. You do that in the afterlife as well. And as soon as you're like done with that process, then you enter heaven because you've been fully refined into the image of Christ. And with your free will, you'll no longer choose to do evil with the free will that you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess I would say I feel like if we don't like what most Christians would say and what you're saying, Derry, is that we were born with free will, right? The ability to choose good or evil, the ability to do good or
Mm.
sin. But then we don't truly have the capacity to live a perfect life. It's not really a true option. Like that free will, yes, we have the free will to choose to make our choices, but we don't actually have the ability to live a perfect life. We don't actually have the ability to evade hell and not need Jesus. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I guess,
I don't think so.
yeah, I
Well,
think that
I think
I
you would
think for
agree,
this
Derry.
to have been a real choice for God to really create a world where like hell was not a an automatic given, we
Mm.
would have needed the option to actually live a perfect life. But
Mm.
um, none of us as human beings have the ability to live a life without mistakes, obviously.
Yes, yes. But I don't think that's the Bible's view of who goes to heaven or hell is like who has the ability to live a perfect life. The point is not about living a
Mm,
perfect life. That's how there's no sin in heaven, is your ability to be perfect. And not your own ability, but something that Christ is forming in you through your consent, right? So through your free will. And so you don't go to heaven or hell based off of your ability to live a perfect life. The point of the Old Testament is to show that people, not the whole point, but one of the narratives, is to show that people, given their own desires, aren't going to always choose good. Sometimes they're going to choose evil. And so you need an example like Christ to come and take the punishment, the guilt, the need to be perfect, so that we no longer have to have that need, so that we aren't held to the standard of perfection, but that slowly over time we can become more and more like Christ until one day we're eventually perfect. And that probably won't be attained in this life. Does that make sense? And then I can answer your hell question.
go
Yes,
for it.
Ethan.
Yeah, well, I was gonna jump in real quick and say like, yeah, the idea about can we live a perfect life and the idea of glorification, all that, it's kind of like not like you said, not here on earth. Everyone does need Jesus to live a perfect life, because you can think about it like, you know, no one can live a perfect life. Someone who has cancer can't do anything about that unless they do, like, maybe they consult a doctor and the doctor gives advice. Maybe that's, obviously, these people might be all over the spectrum with how to treat cancer, but like, homeopathic, whatever medical model we want to go with, there's things they have to do in accordance. So it's like, can that person just do something to get rid of the cancer? Like, likelihood probably not. They need some external intervention to help them rid themselves of that. And an external intervention could be a number of different things. But the question that started this big conversation was the perspective that it seems like God is saying, have a personal relationship with me or die. That's like the crass way to say it. Like, love me or I'm going
Mm,
to kill you, but you have free choice. And I agree. That sounds like an abusive relationship. If someone said to me, I'd be like, okay,
mm,
that's like North Korea, right? Be a patriotic
Yeah.
citizen, or we're gonna kill you. And that's a bad. That's the whole free world recognizes that's bad. And so I think the issue is maybe a misunderstanding and a misframing of, or we just see the scenario differently. And so that's not how a Christian
mm,
would frame it. What I would say is,
mm,
we're looking at it differently. We're looking at it as, every one, that of view, like have a relationship with me or die, I think assumes that people are fine how they are without changing, because part of being a Christian requires changing and repentance. And so it's like, you're clearly not like perfect as you are. Come do it Jesus' way, you'll become perfect, go to heaven. And so there might be an assumption, a worldview assumption, which is not surprising, that people are generally good versus people are generally selfish and not good, and we have a problem that we need to fix. And I think the way the more accurate way, at least the way I think the more accurate way for Christians to frame it, is that God makes every effort to get everyone into heaven as much as he can. That's my worldview. Now,
mm.
a Calvinist would say no, he doesn't. They're wrong in my opinion. But it's like, the Bible talks about how God has set eternity in the hearts of men. That just means humanity. And so every human is gripped with this idea of like, what happens after death? Jesus says that the Holy Spirit has been sent into the world to convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And so it's clear from those scriptures, in my opinion, that God is trying his best to get a hold of everyone, and he's doing what he can in the world to. And some people might say, well, he's not doing his best because he could do it this way, but he's smarter than us, so he's doing what he can to reach these people. And it's kind of like the way you have to frame it is like we humans are kind of like, there's two ways you can look at it. We're like prisoners in a cell, and the prison is sin. And Jesus comes and he unlocks the door and he's like, hey, I can show you the way out of here. You want to come? And, you can follow him out of the prison and have a great life, or you can stay in your cell. You're already in a bad situation. You're already in a cell. If you choose to stay in the cell, you would die in the cell, and there is going to be something that's going to go wrong there. My personal view of hell is less eternal conscious torment and more of like called an annihilation perspective, where you do go to hell, you are punished for your sin, but eventually you're just destroyed. I don't know how many years that will take, maybe millions, but eventually it's like, you could think of puddles. Every puddle, no matter how big or small, will evaporate someday. And so that might be like the sinner in hell, is like, no matter how bad of the sinner they were, eventually they'll cease to exist. We have a couple podcasts on that, so we don't need to go down that rabbit
More than
trail.
a couple.
Yeah,
we've
have
had a
quite
lot of
few.
debates about it.
So all that being said, right, I think the way the Bible frames sinners is like captives in a cell, rebels who are complicit, and people who are sick. And so we have to think about like everyone like that. Like I'm captive in a cell, I can't get out, and I am in accordance with sin because the sin nature obviously wants to do what it wants to do. But that's distracting from the point. I think the second example I wanted to give about this, like, have a relationship with me or died, sounds like an abusive relationship. It's also similar to where like a therapist sees someone who's depressed and suicidal and is like, hey, I know how to help you and steer you away from that direction. I would love to talk, like, let's talk, hey, here's these steps, read these books, take this medication, go to the gym, practice gratitude, whatever the therapist would say. They can give all the guidance they want, but unless the person is going to listen to that and apply it, then they might end up at the trajectory that they're already headed down. And so it's not so much like people are innocently like, I'm doing whatever I want, I'm having a great time, and I'm innocent, la-di-da. And then God comes along and is like, well, you better listen to me or I'm going to punish you. Like children playing with their toys and the dad coming in and saying, you're making too much noise, you better stop or I'm going to spank you. Like that's not the perspective of God. It's the prisoner who's trapped in a cell and Jesus is like, I can get you out of here. Or the person who's going to see the therapist and the therapist is like, I know how to bring you joy and happiness again. Like I can get you this, that you want this better life. And so that's all I would say to jump in there to answer that question. And then I'll get off my soapbox.
Do you have a response, or do you want me to say my opinion about that?
Go for it, Derry.
Okay. I think if we're going to try to frame what God thinks about something, like that it's love me or die, we have to see what the Bible says about it so that we can know like what at least Israel or Christians thought God's thoughts about this were. And so in Peter 3, it says that God's will is that nobody would perish, but that all people would find redemption or find repentance or find eternal life. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's repentance.
Repentance.
Yeah. So it's God's will that nobody that he's ever created would go to hell or anything like that. His will that everybody would make it into heaven. That's God's desire. But there's something stopping that from happening, which is human free will. If you think about how we're framing the question of like love me or die, I think it makes sense to say, if God is real and he exists, that he is an omnibenevolent being. Just based off of the world that we see around us, we could have a big debate about that. We've also had debates about evil God theories and stuff, which is interesting. But I think most people would think like the purpose of life is love and goodness. Like for every movie, every story told, the deepest part of the human experience is that love seems to be like the ultimate thing, the thing that ties us together, ties our relationships together, gives us purpose and meaning in life. And so if God created us, he would have put that in us. And we can infer from that that's a part of who God is. And so God would be all these omnis we talk about in Christianity, but omnibenevolent, so being all good would being one of those things. If by definition God is all good, then not being with him would be something that would be bad, just philosophically. And so I don't think it's like a threat from God. Like Ethan said, it's more of a plea of, I would like you to be good. I would like you to choose good. And we're going to go live in eternity over here. And I would like you to come and be a part of what is good. But if you don't want to, I can't force you. And you could go live in the place that's bad. That isn't like a created bad place where God like creates evil for those people, but it's called the pervasion. So it's the absence of something, the absence of good. And it's just that what's left over, basically, in the pervasion of what's good. It's the cold that is created by the sun not being there. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
I have a lot more
Yeah.
to say, but we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't have any thoughts or responses too.
No, I mean,
That's a
I
lot.
think the issue is I have a million different thoughts that could go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really depends on how you're reading the Bible. I think how you're interpreting the
Sure.
Bible, that kind of like is gonna depend a lot. And then, yeah, I think I just have like a bit of an ethical problem with the
How?
idea. Yeah, and like Ethan, the example that you used of us being in prison and Jesus inviting us out of prison, um, and also what you said about how like Christians would maybe frame what I'm saying differently. Um, I totally agree that like Christians would frame what I'm saying differently, but just because you're looking at something from a different angle doesn't mean that you're looking at a different thing. Um, and I think that yeah, like for me, the way that I kind of what we were saying about like, did God create us with the capacity to live a perfect life? If the answer is no to that question, then that means he put us in the prison to begin with. We're in that prison to begin with from the Christian philosophy. But I don't necessarily think that that's what the authors of the Bible are intending to say. Like the doctrine of like being born evil is not a doctrine that is inherent to all of Christianity. Yeah, sorry, my thoughts are a bit jumbled on the topic, but happy
okay.
to
I think
to move on. Or
you're bringing up points that the church has talked about for 2,000 years. Like the church has debated about not mortal sin. Why am I forgetting the word right now, Ethan?
yeah, I'm also forgetting it.
We just did an
the
episode on
doctrine
it. Why am
of-
I forgetting it? When you're born guilty.
Oh, original sin. Yeah, we
Original
just
sin.
did an
original
episode on that.
sin. Yes,
I don't know
yes.
why it's escaping me.
Yeah, that's
The church has gone back and forth on it for a long time. And
Yeah,
originally,
true.
the church interpreted the scriptures to say that you're not born with a guilt of sin, right? So you could have you have the free will to choose good. So there is a human possibility that somebody could live a perfect life, but everyone that lives doesn't choose to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was saying. Like some Christians would, I think to be a Christian, you have to theologically say that we have the capacity to be perfect, but because otherwise, like it doesn't really make sense if we don't have the capacity to live a perfect life. Otherwise, we are doomed from day one. However, existing in the world, we're never going to meet a single person who has lived a perfect life. And so I think it gets to a bit of a theologically sticky place where you're like, well, we do have the capacity to live a perfect life. Well, no, we don't. And yeah, I think we're never going to get to a very like clear answer because it just puts you in a bit of a theologically sticky place, I think.
I'd be
I think the
curious.
church knows what it. Oh, go ahead, Ethan.
Sorry, Derek. Thank you. I'd be curious on your thoughts if we kind of, did a little thought experiment to make this, because I would say humans were given the ability to live perfect with Adam and Eve. Like they were made perfect. Like theoretically, if they never ate from the tree
Innocent.
of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, perfect in the sense that you could say like holy, like Jesus says, like be holy as I am holy. He's perfect.
Sure.
Sinless.
The word
sure.
just never used in Genesis.
Okay, sure. But, for our example, they're made perfect, right? Sinless, spotless. They don't have any problems. No imperfections. So therefore perfect. If they were made perfect, then it seems like, no, God did make humans perfect and they kind of gave that up. And so I'd be curious if you think this would be a good analogy. Like, say your great grandparents were billionaires, like super wealthy.
Mhm.
They had enough money for your whole every genealogy to build upon it and do great. And they like were given and then your great grandparents are billionaires. They gave it to your grandparents like you guys are billionaires. Your grandparents then are terrible gamblers and just go crazy and lose all the money. Like they just make the worst investments. They go and just spend it all to where their children have no money. And now you're growing up in poverty. You could be like, oh my gosh, like, like what is happening? Like, why am I so poor? Like, it's like, it wouldn't take away from the fact that your ancestors did have wealth and did have the ability to be billionaires just because you're in a position where you can't become a billionaire right now. And so maybe that's a similar thing where it's like, no, we were created with the essence of perfection. They gave it up because they were proverbial bad gamblers. And now we're dealing with the consequences of that. And does that make sense?
Yeah. Hmm. I guess, yeah, I feel like the analogy is, I feel like it's not quite the same in the sense that we're not going to then kill and punish the gamblers for eternity because they were gamblers. That's one aspect of it. And then I guess like I'm not sure, like I personally, as a non-Christian, I don't believe that we have the capacity to be perfect. But I don't think that that makes us bad and deserving of eternal torture and punishment. Yeah, so I understand your analogy, but I'm not sure I would say I agree that it's like synonymous with what we are living. Yeah.
I have a question.
Derry, yes.
Sorry.
Question in the back.
Thank you, Ethan. So I think no matter what theological position you take, whether it's Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, on what kind of chance you have of living a perfect life or not, or what kind of sin you're endowed with when you're born, we still find ourselves in the same situation, like you said. Like theist, non-theist, whatever it is, Christian or non-Christian, you still find yourself in the same situation where there's parts of yourself that you wish you could change and that you want to be different. And that's the point of Christianity, is to become different than you are now. Not that you're not created with value, because you are. Every human being is created with value. That's a biblical principle. Everybody's created in the image of God. The point is restoring that. So the purpose of hell is not to be like, oh, sorry, you didn't believe, like you're going to this place, although belief is a part of it. The purpose is this: the people who will live a life on this earth now that are the trillionaires behind the scenes that no one knows the names of, that are pulling the strings, right? The people that are at the top of the insurance companies that we talked about before the show, that are evil and destroying people's lives, like the people that will most likely live their whole lives, make billions of dollars, and then pass down their wealth to their children, who will most likely just be spoiled kids and get to live a free life of no hardship at all, right? Those kinds of people, they have no necessity in this life to become better people, because they have all the anonymity they want, they have all the power they want, they can get away with whatever they want, which is why we see such crazy stuff like in the Epstein files, because when you have that kind of money, human nature truly gets revealed, and you can see that people, when they're get to do stuff in the dark, they get to do a lot of terrible stuff. Not everybody, but some people choose to use their power and their anonymity to do terrible things. Those kinds of people who don't want to change, who don't want to get better, who just want to do what they want to do, if they get to live through this life with no repercussions and then die, there is no ultimate justice that exists, because they ruined probably thousands or millions of people's lives, and there's never any retribution for that. They never became a better person. They never paid those people back, and those people have no kind of consolation for the evil that's been done to them. The reason that hell exists is for people that don't want to get better. We want to get better, and so we are trying to be like Christ through the power of the Spirit. For people who don't want to get better, hell exists as an ultimate form of justice, so the people that do not want to become like Christ, do not want to become better, want to just use what they've been given on this earth in terrible ways to become terrible people and do terrible things to other people. Justice is ultimately served for them. Whereas if hell doesn't exist, then there is no ultimate justice that's ever served for those people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think this kind of slightly comes back to a point that we were saying earlier. What we believe is like appropriate punishment for something. And I think it seems like what you're saying, Derry, is that you believe that hell, whatever that looks like, whether it's literal physical torture or just separation from God, is an appropriate punishment. And granted, there are all different kinds of evil in this world. There are evils that are absolutely horrible and harm people's lives so much. And there are also things like getting drunk or whatever, that are not going to affect other people necessarily. So yeah, I think personally I would not say that that is an appropriate form. I don't think it's an appropriate response to everyone's actions in the world. But then the other thing I was going to say is this idea. I was actually talking about this with a few people in my DMs a couple of weeks ago. Kind of this idea that like hell is something that people choose, like they choose to not get better, follow God or whatever. I think that perspective kind of implies that Christianity is already believed, or it's already the most convincing reality. Like I can't choose or not choose God if I don't believe in him, like if somebody were to tell me or to say, hey, Derry, you're going to suffer forever because you haven't obeyed the tooth fairy. You'd be like, well, what? As far as I know, the tooth fairy hasn't given me anything to do. And so that wouldn't really be a real choice for you because you don't believe that the tooth fairy is giving you any commands to begin with. So I guess I kind of have a problem with that idea of like hell is for the people who are choosing not to get better, because in my experience, 99% of people in the world are wanting to live better and better lives. If the criteria is just wanting to become a better person, then I think most people would go to heaven. But the criteria is not wanting to heal. The criteria is believing the right thing. And believing the right thing is, by Christian standards, for a lot of other people, it's just not convincing. And I think in this scenario, if God is going to give us this option between a relationship with him and eternal suffering, I think that relationship with him, it has to be the most convincing reality. But even just as we've talked about, the Bible itself, the book that is meant to be God's word to us, according to a lot of people, even that is very, very highly debated. Many Christians don't believe in a literal hell. I don't think that the authors of the Bible believed in a literal hell. We see them talk about lots of different things like Sheol, Hades, Gehenna. All of those are like slightly different things. And I think that like it would have to be the most convincing reality. But even within Christianity and Judaism, there is so much debate. And that's why I want to approach the Bible as a book of wisdom, because I think it invites us to ask questions more than it gives us answers.
So much to say. I love all your thoughts. Ethan, jump in if you want to, or you talk first. I have stuff I want to say.
Well, yeah, we could both be talking for hours. I would just make the one point, and we don't necessarily need a response for this because we've been kind of talking about it for a while. But I guess my question would be, Claire, is for we're talking about the justice system and, is hell a reasonable punishment to fit the crime? Right. And going back to the example of the millionaire, let's say, again, your grandparents are billionaires, your parents gambled it away, you grew up in poverty, and you're still like, okay, but does that mean that it's just that people go to hell because they're in poverty? I think the justice thing would be like, well, you grew up in poverty and now you started committing crimes. that like because you're in poverty, so now you're justly deserving your own punishment. But then the question would still it'd still be like, okay, but is hell a just punishment for people who are sinning on earth? And if it's eternal conscious torment, is that fair? And or is even like violence towards as a means of justice a fair response? Because earlier you mentioned you don't really like America's penal penal system. So I guess my question would be, we don't need to answer this necessarily, but like, is there ever a scenario in the world ever where the death penalty is a just and right response to someone's actions? And if the answer to that is yes, then we see, okay, then it does seem like extreme measures can be appropriate responses to some evils. And if that's the case, then could that same logic be applied eternally to God, where like, yes, there's types of sinners or sins that deserve extreme responses from God, and God in his wisdom, because we're assuming God's the wisest being here, can distribute that rightly. So that'd be the only thing I'd leave you with as far as like the justice system, just to reflect on like if the death penalty is ever viable. Like, is it fair for Hitler? Is Hitler someone we could like give the death penalty, or like anyone on Epstein's list? Is it fair to give them the death penalty? I would think so. Like you read some of the stuff, you're like, you're a demon. You're actually like, it's terrible. And I would think like, yes, these people need some type of extreme justice. But then I'll just ask one question because I'll kind of transition maybe into the next part. But then you'll jump in before we get there. But then I'm thinking, because you said that even this conversation takes assuming like the tooth fairy example, like if you don't follow the tooth fairy, you're going to be punished. You have to assume the tooth fairy is real. So maybe the question, we're going back and forth on the ethical problems of hell and justice, but maybe we could even talk about like, is there good reasons to believe a God exists? And then is there a good reason to believe that's a Christian God? But we'll get there after Derek gives his response as well, because that's probably seems the natural progression.
Yeah, I do have thoughts on your question as well, Ethan. But yeah, go ahead, Derry.
I actually think that the death penalty is besides the point, because whether or not you believe in the death penalty, we believe in taking people's lives by putting them in jail. We take their freedom, which is by definition taking their lives, and putting it in a cell. We just let time kill them instead of doing it ourselves. So I don't think there's really a difference. For the worst of offenders, because they live in a solitary confinement for the rest of their lives. Like all freedom that they had is now gone. For your question that you had in response to what I said about the level of punishment given to somebody and how most people want to live better lives, right? I would agree with you. I think most people would like to live better lives, but they don't. And if you look over the course of human history, like our nature has not really changed. Like there is as much, and like to get in, like I guess trigger warning for people listening, like there's as much like murder today as there ever has been. And there's as much sexual assault today as there ever has been, if not more, because of the amount of population that we have. If you think about it, like what happened to people in the Epstein files, if you're aware, like is crazy. Like the amount of like pedophilia.
What's the Epstein
and sexual
files?
assault.
I'm just kidding.
I know you're not in America right now, so
It has made it over here.
Yeah. So like it's pretty mind blowing. I think we should say like those people deserve some kind of justice. The problem is it's not contained to the Epstein files, because I think the statistic is 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in their life. And it's like 1 in 7 boys. And most statistical analyses say that that's actually underreported by like 70 to 90%, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the case that sexual assault is just happening by some pedophilia elite. Like the world has a problem of sexually assaulting people and taking their freedom from them. So there is something very wrong with humanity, even though our desire inside of us is to be good people. What most people do with their power in secret is harm or be selfish against other people. And so no matter what we believe theologically, like there is a problem that humanity has been broken from the beginning, and we're still broken and we break each other all the time. And so Christianity's solution is that there's a person that you could be like, that's God, that could transform the way you live your life. And that's more of like the philosophical approach to what we're saying. And the reason you need hell is because you need some kind of ultimate justice for the world. Now, hell is not divvied out the same for everybody. The Bible is very clear that there's different levels of punishment for different sins and different people. All sin leads to death because all sin separates you from being good. And so now if we want to become good, we have to be with the one that is good to teach us how to be good. But all sin equals death, but not all sin equals the same kind of punishment. So for Hitler, there's a far different punishment than there is for someone who just got drunk and decided they don't want to be like God. They don't want a relationship with him. Like, there's completely different worlds in hell. And I think Dante's Inferno obviously like has done a lot of possible damage to the way that we view hell today. But as a fictional work that's not supposed to be a theologically literal work, it does a good job in showing us the different levels of punishment, because he has different levels in his analogies for hell in his story. That's what I would say about hell. Is like there isn't one punishment to fit all crime. It's like, do you want to be restored and be made good? If not, then you're paid back for the sins that you've done and then eliminated in our view. Because if you don't want to be with God, like, he's not going to keep you around. Like, the Bible never promises people immortality. And if you're not a Christian, you don't believe in immortality anyway. I mean, unless you're believing some other form of theism, and you believe in immortality in that way. Immortality is only promised to people that are given it by God. And those are the people who eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, eat of the tree of life, which is Christ in Scripture. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have so many thoughts on both of what you guys said. So first off, I would say I love how you're referring to Dante as a theologian almost. That's kind of funny to me. I think...
Well, like more of a philosopher than a theologian.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I think what you're saying makes sense. I do agree with the fact that different crimes merit different punishments. However, I don't really see anywhere in the Bible where it talks about that. Like, personally, I can't think of any verses. If you can think of any verses, like, feel free to send them to me afterwards or whatever you want, Derry. But I personally can't think of any verses where that is implied. But then, lots. I think another thing that's interesting is kind of your perspective that it's kind of like the optimistic versus pessimistic approach to humanity. I think most Christians would probably have a more pessimistic view on human nature. And for me, I feel like it really depends on the day. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a report that came out that like 62 million men visited a rape academy in the month of February. Like, 62 million men were interested in learning how to rape women.
Hey guys, just wanted to jump in here and give some clarity. This number is highly exaggerated by a lot of influencers online. It's taken from an article that was talking about victims of abuse and stuff like that visiting adult sites. And the 63 million number was visits to the website, not specific to gender. The Academy claim is from a Telegram group that is connected to people or members on the site, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So that number of the Academy was a lot closer to 1,000. Still disgusting, still terrible. But you can see the difference and the importance of the claiming 63 million men attended this Academy versus 1,000. It's just a big deal to get the accuracy right, so we wanted to jump in here and make sure we gave you guys an updated, more accurate representation of the claim. So 1,000 men in the Academy, terrible, disgusting. 63 million people visited the site. That could be men and women. So just for clarity, now back to the show.
Yeah, so like some days I definitely have a very dark perspective of humanity, but I think kind of an interesting thing to acknowledge is that like 80% of perpetrators, that's not an actual fact number. It's just like vaguely what I'm remembering. But most perpetrators are men. And I think that is something very interesting to acknowledge. If we're going to look at women, there's way less perpetrators of violent crimes in the female demographic. So that's, I think, something that's important to acknowledge. But even still, I don't want death to be the approach to that. And actually, so kind of coming back to what you said, Ethan, about like capital punishment, I thought it was interesting that Derry then said that capital punishment was not a good example, that we should more compare it to life in prison. I actually think
Either way.
that I personally think that what Ethan is saying agrees more with the Christian theological framework, in the sense that like Christianity, or the evangelical perspective of Christianity, does say that death is the appropriate response, that life in prison is very different than capital punishment. I'm not going to say which one I think is worse. I think they're both quite bad in their own way. But I would say that even if I did agree that capital punishment was appropriate for some people, I still don't think that would mean it's appropriate for everybody. And what evangelical Christianity is saying is that everyone is deserving of hell until they have a relationship with Jesus. And I don't think any of us three would say that every human being deserves capital punishment for the lives that they live here on earth. So yeah, I'm not really a proponent of capital punishment. It's a tricky question. Like, I will not deny that. Like, for Hitler, Epstein, or whoever, like, of course, I think they are some of the most vile human beings on the planet, and they have done so much harm. But like, is killing them the appropriate response from a loving God who has ultimate power and could redeem them? I don't know.
How could he redeem them?
I think it is. I would say yes, because yes, God can redeem them, but he could only redeem them if they want to cooperate with his ways. And the reason it is good, and it is actually a loving act, is because you don't want to serve a God who doesn't punish evil, because then, it's like the idea of like silence is violence, right? Where it's like, like what does that say to the victim of that perpetrator about their God if God doesn't do something about it?
Totally.
And so that's where it's like, oh yeah, like, do you want a God that's like apathetic or dismissive of people because he's like, well, I believe the best in them, I think they'll change? Or is he like, absolutely not, like, you have to be punished, like, you cannot do this? And that this might not be this is also maybe more ethical problem, but it also serves as an example for everybody else. Like, when everyone else watches what happens, you're like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. And it's like, we do see that, right? Like, less people are probably committing crimes because the nature of just them being illegal, right? You probably had less people smoking weed when it was illegal versus now that it's legal, everyone's pretty much smoking weed. And so you do have, like, there is things where, like, real laws against things and punishments for breaking those laws do help to create a better, safer world for the totality of people, I think, at large. And I think we might just have like be at an impasse as far as like a worldview perspective, because I have a far less optimistic view for humanity, where I'm like, yeah, I guess I would say if we think like, oh, God is unjust, then I'm like, I think we just don't understand how terrible humans are, and left to their own devices, I don't think it's like unique that maybe certain people do crazy things. I think everyone could be like that, and everyone has the capacity in them to do terrible things.
So why not just send everybody to purgatory until they get better?
Because
there
they
are
haven't
views
chosen to do that.
There's views of that. It's called like a Christian universalist perspective. I don't think it's like the most historically valid or biblically accurate view, but
But it's not heretical.
Yeah, there's solid Christians who believe it.
Okay.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's solid people who believe it, but I don't subscribe
there was
to it.
early church Christians that did believe it.
Totally, yeah. I think to me that makes a little bit purgatory. I mean, I don't believe in purgatory, but I think the idea of purgatory makes more sense with a loving God to me, to give us like, the actual possibility to be redeemed and recovered. And I don't really see why not,
In that model too, though, everyone who goes to the intermediary state or hell but is refined and restored, they all choose to be there still. Like, they all make a free choice with their free will to follow God, and which is why they're being refined, which is what Ethan is saying, like, is necessary for someone to even come to a place where they want to become a better person and they actually decide to follow Christ. Because most people want to become a better person, but don't want to actually give up what it takes to become a better person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that just kind of comes back to what I was saying about, like, to make a choice, you have to believe in your options to begin with.
Yeah, but everybody in the entire world comes from a culture that believes in God. Like, there isn't a culture in the world that
Ooh,
doesn't
that's
have
an
some
interesting
kind of theistic view. There's like small parts of Europe you can point to that have become more dominated by atheistic ideologies, but almost every culture in the world I know has some sort of deity.
So is believing in any deity enough?
I don't think so, because every deity has a different character, and so a different way they want to, a different goal, right? So not every model of God can be true. Different conversation for a different time. The point of it, though, is that not every culture has a tooth fairy that you have to believe in to go to heaven, but every culture has an innate idea of God and the innate idea that people need to be better. And so there is that belief in every culture. And Ephesians, I believe, or Corinthians, says that God has revealed himself to all creation so that they could reach out and cry out and actually reach him and touch him. That's not to say that anyone can get saved for any reason. Like, you still have to believe in God. But God can reveal himself to anybody, and it has revealed himself to everybody through creation. So you don't have to have this like tooth fairy knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I would disagree with the idea that everyone has a foundation of belief in God.
Well, not everyone believes in God, but I'm saying everybody grows up in a culture where they have the ability to believe in God.
Having left the US quite a bit, I would say I probably still disagree with that. I would say that a lot of cultures do not have God ingrained in their culture.
Which cultures have you observed that don't have that?
So I grew up in France. France is a very, very secular society. And then I now live in Australia. I'm, I guess, just kind of playing devil's advocate here that, like, I think a lot of people grow up in families where God is not a part of the conversation. And even if he was, let's say you grew up in a Muslim household, I still don't think that means you're starting off on an equal playing field to people who grow up in a Christian family. There's very different access to knowledge about the Christian God.
100%. But knowledge isn't necessarily what gets somebody saved. God has the ability to save anybody that he wants to by revealing to them through special revelation. So someone can be a Muslim, like we have many stories of friends who were Muslims and God appeared to them and they became saved, even though they had no ability to search and find God in the Christian perspective. They were still able to because of special revelation. For you growing up in France, anybody who lives in France has the ability to search and reach out for God because the culture has within it the idea that there could be a God that exists. Not that everybody believes in it or that you grew up in a household that believes in it, but the culture readily around you has that in their system of knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it is not unavailable to anybody, is what we're saying. But maybe we've gone too far down this rabbit hole. We either transition to like belief in God in general, or we could, I guess, pit our worldviews against each other of like what, because I would have a problem. Like if I was like, okay, I have a problem with hell all of a sudden, like you do, I don't know that I would convert to your belief system and say that God doesn't exist, because I would have more of a problem with justice not being served for the people who deserve justice throughout history than I would with hell necessarily. I would see more evil being done with there being no justice at all than there being an over amount of justice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But do you want to move on then to just God, the belief in God in general, or?
You're asking me or Ethan?
Yeah, you. Sorry, Claire.
Yeah, sounds good. Can you guys give me 1 minute? I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. We took a little break. That's the magic of editing. It was a split second for you. But we have decided this conversation is
Leave it
going
in.
great, probably twice as long as our first conversation, getting really deep into great things. About to transition into the topic of God specifically. So we talked a whole bunch about the ethical problems with hell, justice, punishment. Now we're going to transition into belief in God in general. Should we believe in God? Do we have evidence to believe in God? Which God should we believe in? However, we could have a 3-hour episode, but some of us, me, have to go to sleep because I am on Eastern Standard Time. So we are going to try to have on Claire for a third time next week or in the next couple weeks, depending on our schedules. Ideally, the next episode will be another Claire featured episode to discuss this and go back and forth on the topic of God. This has been super fun. Claire, thank you so much for taking the time 2 weeks in a row, maybe 3 times in a row to come on. This has been a blast. It's pretty rare to find people who you can disagree pretty pointedly with and also not get mad at or not have them get mad at you either. So thank you for your generosity and your hospitality for us and taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really good conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, vote down in the comments which one of us you would like Claire to replace for the podcast as well. And then we'll just do whatever you say. And next time will be some female representation for the podcast as a host.
All right, see you guys next week.
Friends, a couple places in the episode, I was trying to make analogies that I don't think would carry through theologically to be true. So just to recap on what I think that it is like the analogy Ethan made about Adam and Eve or the rich person having the ability to be perfect. I don't think that we in this world have the ability to be perfect, which is what I was trying to show, but just said it incorrectly. I think that everybody has a sin nature and with our free will choose to sin. Not that everyone is born, like we've said, with an original sin. We're born without guilt, but with a sin nature and we choose to sin. So that's what I was trying to say. But in so many words, it got lost. It's hard to analogize things and have it carry over one-to-one with strict doctrine. And so when evangelizing, it can be hard to toe both lines. So don't come.
Derry's not a heretic.
I swear, I'm not a heretic. Please.
He's not a sinless perfectionist.
Calvin,
and if you want to hear our
me.
podcast about original sin, if that surprised you what Derry just said, we did do a podcast a while ago. So I'll try to put it in the cards, but probably just search it and watch every episode we have. Be easier. Peace out, guys.